I try to make work that matters. I feel like I've been chronicling our time. I mean, we live in this image storm, and I'm trying to slow things down. All these images that we see for a split second, you know, they're gone. I'm trying to record the time that we live in. When Gaza happened, and the incredible amount of images that came out of Gaza, and the whole Israeli invasion, it was like, I could not figure out how to deal with those images. I could not figure out how to deal with them. They were so overwhelming, and they were so horrific, and just like the world has gone fucking crazy, and I didn't know how to deal with it, but I wanted to deal with it, and I don't know how it happened, but I decided to go backwards and look at history, and I chose these two images. I remember seeing Goya's May 3rd vividly as an art student when I was traveling Europe, and I remember seeing the Massacre of the Innocents by Rubens, and so I decided to make these two drawings that kind of like go together. So the Massacre of the Innocents by Rubens is this horrific picture of when Herod was trying to get Jesus, of Moses, and they're killing all these babies in this painting. It's this horrific painting. So there's like 18, like maybe 10 or 15 kids, babies are being smashed and killed in the painting. And then Goya's painting is like this execution of like, again, innocent people, which it looked to me a lot like Gaza. Like the people in the pictures almost look like they're, like could be, you know, Middle Eastern. And I thought, here are these two paintings from, you know, hundreds of years ago, showing the same shit going on in the world. And it's like, you know, there's this saying, those that don't know history tend to repeat it. I tend to think that those that know history tend to repeat it. They do repeat it. It's just, so those, I think the thing is, I have this incredible rage about what's happening in the world. I have a great life, and my life is disturbed by the fact that the world is so unfair to so many people. And I felt compelled to make these two works. And I think that I read someplace where St. Augustine said that hope has two daughters, courage and rage. And so I have a lot of hope, you know. But in that sense, so those two drawings were, the other thing is, by doing those drawings, they're almost like forensic. Like it's like you take them apart on such a visceral level. It's like, how long does it take to draw a brushstroke versus how long, you know, those kind of relationships. And you really take apart the drawing. I mean, in the Goya painting, I realized there was like in the central figure, the guy has like a little stigmata in his hands. It's like he's like Jesus, and how the people that were shooting, you know, gunmen, it was a very, and at the same time, the pile of dirt behind them looked like the rubble in Gaza. And at the same time, the Massacre of the Innocents looked like the attack on the Israeli settlement. So it was a way of like dealing with those images without being, I have a problem with gratuitous illustrations of, I mean, I don't want to illustrate things. I mean, I'm interested in the emotional knowledge of things in that sense. So, I mean, at the same time, when you look at the drawing, it's like you can see, the thing about doing the charcoal drawings is that because they're so labor intensive, I think people tend to actually look at them, and a lot of times they think they're photographs, and then when they find that they're charcoal drawings, they look a bit closer. So I find that the fact that people look closer is an interesting factor for me. In the year of 1999 or something like that, my kids were home from school, Christmas vacation. I had just finished Johnny Mnemonic, the film. My work as an artist, I was a bit lost, a bit confused about what to do. I mean, at that point, I had done like 2 big bodies of work or 3 bodies of work, and I didn't know what to do anymore. I was a bit lost. And so I went to this, my kids would drive me crazy at home, so I came to the studio that day. It's like December 28th or something like that. And I decided, I had just taught my middle son to surf. And he left one of the surfing magazines here that I had, same magazines I had when I was a kid, which is interesting. But and I thought, I saw a picture of a wave, and I thought, wow, I've always been interested in meditations on power. And I thought, wow, nature is the ultimate power. Why don't let's make a drawing of this. I tore a picture of a wave out of the magazine, and I was going to put it up at Page Projector and make this drawing of a wave. So I had paper, the same paper that I had used for Men in Cities drawings, things like that. So it was like 8 by 6 feet or something like that. So I decided to make this. And my main medium at that point, I used charcoal a little bit, but I mostly used graphite. I found graphite to be very precise, but I didn't have any graphite. I didn't have no pencils. And in the back of the cabinet where I kept all my supplies, there was a box of this old shitty charcoal, which I hate. I hated charcoal. I thought it was messy, imprecise. And I said, well, that's all I got. And I started drawing the wave with the charcoal. And I didn't go home for 2 days. My wife was very upset, but I stayed here at the studio, and I started the first wave drawing. And then from that point on, it kind of exploded. The thing about the charcoal drawings is I remember seeing this Werner Herzog movie about the Cave of Dreams, and I thought, wow, those are charcoal drawings on the wall. I'm like my ancestry is like I don't go back to Caravaggio or Rembrandt. I go back to those fuckers in the cave. I mean, I'm a caveman in that sense. So, and the thing about charcoal is it's incredibly primitive medium. It's so archaic, which I like, and I like that it's almost somewhat funerary because it's burnt. It's like it's dead. It's like it's a remnant of the earth. I mean, there's something about. At the same time, the quality that I was able to achieve. The paper that I use has very little texture to it. It has very fine, has just enough texture to almost evoke like a photographic grain. So at the same time, I realized I could fool people thinking that they're photographs, And I think people tend to remember their memory is like photographs, And I think that somewhere I read that we dream in black and white. And I thought, I see a picture and if I take a picture on my phone, I immediately turn it black and white. I crank up the contrast. It's, to me, I see things better, maybe. I mean, I just like the way it looks in black and white, for sure. I've been appropriating history for a while. I think it's really, as an artist, it's like you don't want to reinvent the wheel, but at the same time you want to learn. And art is like, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, and so in that sense, I have to appreciate what I'm standing on. In that sense, what's interesting is that, I mean, when I first got involved in art, I didn't quite have the courage to become an artist. I thought I'd become an art historian. And I traveled around Europe looking at art, and at one point I realized there's enough art. I think it's time for me to make art in that sense. And that was a real revelation. But the thing is, by looking at historically things, they talk to you in a way that they're almost like notations to other artists, how to do things, how to, it's not only just composition. I mean, I spent a lot of time on my works, the compositions of my work. So I may find a photograph that I want to use out of the media, but I alter it in such a way that it has a structural composition that is really important, because I think it's really important how you read a picture. Art is an incredibly democratic medium, because you can come to a picture and read that picture however way you want. You don't have to start at the beginning. You can look at it however, and the other thing is, you think about how many times have you seen your favorite movie? Maybe 3 times, 4 times. How many times have you looked at your favorite painting? Maybe 10, 20. So the thing is, I like the democracy of art for sure in that sense. I found that really quite interesting. But yeah, I was thinking about how many dead people my kid saw by the time he was 10 on the media. I mean, there's things that you see on newspapers and magazines and television and movies is inundated by these insane amount of images, and somehow they have to be mediated. They have to be somehow dealt with in a way that, I mean, sometimes I think my work is a mediation of these works, but at the same time, I also think that sometimes they're a form of atonement, that I'm taking these works and saying, this is really a fucked up situation, and I'm going to, every image I make requires a kind of dedication of a chunk of my life, so they take so long to make. In that sense, it's like, they're basically like prayers in a weird way, or prayers on fire or something like that. But I mean, at the same time, I think my pictures look like, sometimes I feel like I'm selling fire in hell. There's a weird thing about possessing images. So I think one of the basic nature about being an artist is this desire to share. So I see something, and I want to tell you what it is I see. I remember as a young, early student, I had taken some acid, and I was walking down the street with a friend of mine, and in the tree, I saw Jimmy Hendrix. And I grabbed my friend and I said, look, do you see Jimi Hendrix's face in the tree? And he says, no. I said, but look over here and look over there. And he says, yeah, I see. That's what art is. Art is like saying, this is what I see, and I want you to see how I see it. In that sense. And so I think what it is, I find images that move me, and I try to figure out a way how to present them to other people to experience how I see them. That's simple. And I mean, I think in a weird way, this is a way that I think somehow I want to be remembered. It's like, this is like, making art is a proof that I existed, and that I was here in that way. So I think that's kind of important. I mean, on the other hand, I have great suspicion of anything that makes sense, so on the other hand, but yeah, the thing also that slowing down the images is that all these images that we see happen, you see them on the television, you see them on the newspaper, you throw them away. So I save newspapers. remember as a kid, there was a psychologist on my block, this old guy named Steinberg, who he would walk to the subway the same way I was walking. And he would always have this like briefcase, and stuffed in the briefcase was like all these newspapers. And I would always say to him, "What are you doing with all those newspapers?" He said, "One day I'm going to read them, you know." I've become that guy, you know. So one day I looked at this old newspaper. This is like 2 years ago. I had a newspaper that I hadn't looked in. It's like maybe a week old. And I'm going through the newspaper, and there is this photograph on like page 10 of a Jewish cemetery in Strasbourg with these SWAT stickers spray painted onto all the tombstones. I mean, it flipped me out. It was like, this shit, it was so profound that it's still going on. And some idiot defaced all these tombstones. So I got the rights for the photograph. I sent another guy back there to photograph the tombstones so I could translate them, so I could read who the people were. You know, there were all these people that led, you know, it was right before, all these people died right 1930, right before the Holocaust happened. So and at the same time, the guy had spray painted the SWAT sticker, so you could actually, it's kind of like abstract expressionism, how you could feel the brushstroke. You could see him going, shh, shh, you know, and this picture just flipped me out so much, and I said, I have to do this. So that's one of the reasons why I did it. It was just rage, and you know, but at the same time, it goes back to art like the Raft of Medusa thing. How do you make beauty out of horror? And how do you make those things be able to like transcend the horror and inform? So this idea of these images is how do I take these images that you see on TV or a newspaper and they're gone, how do I take them and give them respect and make them some kind of permanence? At the same time, I own them. That's really important to me. So when I make these drawings, I take them in on a level that's so profound, it's almost like on a molecular level. I'm taking them in so deeply and processing and thinking about them that they become like voodoo objects. They're so loaded. Because I think when you make art, the energy that you put into that artwork is experienced when someone looks at it. So when you see a Jackson Pollock painting, you see that he threw the painting, you actually physically feel that gesture. So yeah, I mean, I like that the work is very labor intensive. It takes a lot. The difference between my work and traditional painting is that I don't have to deal with drying time, which is great. But the biggest thing is that most traditional painting is you work from dark to light. So like if you're doing a tree, you paint dark green and light green. The last thing you do is the white highlights. I work the opposite. I'm working from white to dark. So I start with a white background, and all the white in the drawings are the white of the paper. So the only thing, if you can see in the studio, there are lots of different color blacks. There's black, medium black, gray black, warm black. So the sense is the last thing that I do in a drawing is the black. So it's opposite of painting in that sense. But at the same time, calling them drawings is they are the size of paintings for sure. I mean, I want to compete with paintings for sure. My view of America. I think America is still. I mean, I think 3/4 of the world would move here if they had the chance. I think America it has the basic idea of this idea of a diverse democracy is quite brilliant, but I mean, I still think the idea of America is somewhat hopeful of what the problem about America is that there are a lot of Americans that don't want to change it. It needs to be, you know, that what mankind happened, and then somebody banged on a drum and made music, and music has changed all. So we're not like just going boom, 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 boom. You know, now you have Beethoven. Music has changed. So the Constitution was written. It has to change. It has to adapt. There are people in the United States who think the Constitution is like the fucking Bible, and they're reading this thing written by all white men who owned slaves, and they're thinking that this is, so they don't want to change this. There's a really weird sense of this oppression of text. You got the Bible, you got the Constitution, you have the Quran, that where people think these written things, they're living documents. They're meant to change, but there is no change. At the same, so I think in America, you know, what America did for the world was it gave it a new way of doing things. And like in Europe after the Second World War, all these countries had a chance to redo their governments. And they based a lot of it on the American idea, but they did better versions of it. You know what I mean? But the United States is still distorted in its sense. I mean, see, the United States isn't a tribe. The problem is about the United States is we think we're a sports team. And the problem is, what's the goal of a sports team? To win. And that's what Trump is always saying, we're going to win, win, win. I mean, in the United States, it's like the history of sports in America is like the history of America. It's like after a huge male population during the American Civil War young men were fighting the Civil War. And the Civil War ended, and they all went home. And they had this camaraderie that existed during war that you don't have in daily life. And they missed that camaraderie, and sports developed. Baseball happened. Football happened. And if you look at the history of America, after every major war, sports gets bigger and bigger. So after the First World War, football gets really huge. I mean, after the Civil War, baseball happens. After First World War, football happened. After the Second World War, you know, basketball is happening. So the country gets more and more. The thing about sports is that if you look at the Roman culture, gladiatorial games were a way of keeping the country in a constant state of war. And that's what like American football is. It's like, I love football, and it's spectacular. It's an incredibly stupid game, but it looks really great, and it's meant for television. And it's basically keeping you in a constant state of war. The football games on television last like 3 hours. But in actuality, in football, when the referee blows the whistle so a play can start, and when the play ends, he blows the whistle. So that from whistle to whistle, the length of a football game, the actual action of a football game is 13 minutes. But they take those 13 minutes and they turn into 3 fucking hours of commercials. And a lot of the commercials are for cars, which is like war propaganda, because you need oil for your cars, and you know, and then a lot of it is food. We keep you fat, stupid, and drive your car. It's like there's the body puberty, when you go from boy to a man, which is interesting for men. You go from play to real aggression, and but then there's the intellectual puberty that happens. And I played football when I was in high school, and I played a little bit in college. It's a very violent game, and I really loved the violence. I loved the hitting people. I loved the violence of it all. At the same time, I loved watching movies like Sam Peckinpah, where people getting shot. Anyway, the thing is that right around that time, I started smoking pot. Hippies started happening, and then the Vietnam War protests, things like that. And then when Kent State happened, when Jeffrey Miller, this kid that I went to high school with, was shot, it was like a what the fuck? And that it was like the light just went on. It was just like, and it seemed like I never, at that point, I didn't think about being an artist. I was just involved. I got really involved in like political stuff and protests and things like that. And it was always there. Then it kind of, when Jimmy Carter became president, we thought maybe his hair went over his ears, he wore blue jeans. Maybe we thought, but the world always disappoints you. But somehow, I think that making art in itself is a political act, period. It's about the freedom of expression. So some guy who's painting boats down by the dock, someone can come along and say, you can't do that anymore. So I came of age as a professional artist during the age of Reagan. And Reagan is the first Trump. Reagan said, he was the guy who said, let's make America great again. He was saying things like, let's return to traditional values. In America, traditional values are fucking slaves. That was like 100 years ago. So what is American traditional values? So anyway, I think Reagan really forced me to become really political at that point, more so than and what's interesting is when this young man, Michael Brown, was shot by a cop, young black man shot by a cop, because he was a big black man. And the riots happened, and the American police, who now had acquired all this leftover equipment from Iraq, show up at the protest in fucking tanks and machine guns and helmets. And I made this drawing that was basically, I saw this image in the newspaper, and I thought, is this the Ukraine, or where is this? And then I realized I could see McDonald's in the picture, I can see gasoline, and I realized this picture is America, and the police showed up such a show of force against these people who were protesting. It just totally flipped me out. So I made a drawing of that at that point. I think art is a recording of the time that we live in. That's its main. If you want to look at what it was like to be when Rembrandt was alive, you look at Rembrandt or Caravaggio. You look at those works. You can see what's going on in that sense. They're a recording of the times that you live in. I don't know how much art can actually affect what's happening in the world as it's happening, although I think that I would hope that my work makes you think a little bit more about things. For sure, that they question that these images that you've seen like for a second, or now you see them and you can actually really look at them and go, whoa, that's really happening, or that happened, or things like that. I think, I want to give you a chance to reflect on those images, for sure, in that sense. What's interesting in politics is the dilemma of attempting to reset zero. And this goes across the board. So there are enormous amounts of injustice that happens in the world. And how do you correct those injustices? How do you get back to zero? I mean, the thing about artists is that we have the Cassandra curse. We can see the future, but nobody wants to listen to us in that sense. I find it that sometimes I feel like I'm predicting the future, which is kind of sad. There was a painting I call it Obama Leaving, and I found the image of it maybe 2 years before he left office. When I saw this image, I went, I have to save this image. It was him walking on the airfield with a few Secret Service men on a nice day. So what I did is I took that image, I made more Secret Service, so it was a bit like the Matrix, something like that. And I made this really stormy sky. So it looked like a storm was coming. So, I mean, it was basically like saying, like, he's going, and look what's coming. And then Trump being elected, it was like, I started this series called Destroyer Cycle. So it was just like, I just felt like I have to do this stuff. I find a moral imperative to do the work I do. It's not like I want to do this. This gets, the last show that I did, the 2 years ago, last show, I did this one show called Fugitive Images. I realized these images are fugitives, and I have to catch them. And I have to hold them and show them to you. And there was the graveyard that was in it. There was this parade of all these immigrants coming, like thousands of Latinos coming to the United States. There was anyway. The show was so emotionally exhausting that I was so depressed afterwards. It was like, it's really weird. I feel like I'm the worm in the bottom of the bottle. I'm taking in all these poisons and stuff like that. So when Reagan was president, I started thinking about someone was going to come to the studio and tell me to stop doing the work I was doing. And I still think that could happen. I still think that could happen.